be just a second. He'll indicate again.
We're ready.
Already. If we could do that like we were talking about, the births, how happy it was, an event, how the children were born at home, midwives, and how there was an absence of pre- and postnatal care. Yeah, if you go ahead, please.
Well, I remember the days when the ladies did not, when they learned they were to be a mother, they did not go to the doctor. Sometime during the period, the father would warn the doctor of the approximate date they would need him. And then she went on about her.
Okay, you were doing fine. We'll start just over again here, just in a second. We'll start from the beginning. Okay, we'll start again, please.
In the years that I remember, when women learned that they were to be mothers, the father at some time during the period would warn the doctor that of the approximate date, and then she would go on about her business of work and caring for her children and her household. She didn't go many places at all, and so she accomplished a lot. And there was this precious layette to make with all these little hand stitches. And if you didn't make a proper layette, you wouldn't be a proper mother, was really was what they thought. And so there was no end to the lace and the tiny tucks and the crochet and the different things that went into these little layettes, and they made practically all of it. There was no shop to go to buy these garments, and she kept them hidden away from the children. And if she was overtaken sometime sewing on them, she would hide them right quickly, and she would say it was for a neighbor if she was pressed for an answer. Then, when the days were accomplished and they sent for the doctor, it wasn't a very fast process. There was no phone. Somebody went on a horse to summon the doctor, and you had to do it in plenty of time. And the neighbor ladies who had been spoken to before would come in. They acted in the way of what had formerly been called the midwife. And at least two of the neighbors came in, women with experience who would help out. And then they would stay for several hours to see that everything was all right following the birth. And the children of the household were usually sent to a neighbor's house to spend the night if it occurred in the night, and they wondered why they were unceremoniously pulled from their beds and taken to a neighbor's, and they sometimes rebelled against it because they didn't want to play at that period of the time. They didn't know why they were going. Well, then they were very happy in the household, and the children were happy to greet this new little baby. And of course the parents were very proud that they had produced this. Well, it is magic in a way. It's a wonderful process, and they were very pleased. And the doctor would come perhaps for 2 visits following, and that was all. There was no prenatal care or anything like that.
That's regarding weddings, and maybe the weddings were held at home, or maybe I've heard people say that in a sense it was almost a spontaneous thing at church. After service was conducted, they said anything that comes about regarding weddings and how they're different than today.
In those days I attended.
Would you start again, please? Now, go ahead.
Okay.
In those days I attended 2 home weddings and 2 or 3 ceremonies in the pastor's study, but they were mostly church weddings. And sometimes they were in the evening and sometimes following the morning service. Now, there was no florist concerned. The women, all the neighbors and friends, brought their best flowers. The dogwood, the spiral, the snowball, and all the white flowers. And they came to our house for flowers and roses. And they particularly liked our English ivy because they could twine it around the altar. So the colors of green and white were carried out. And it was very beautiful. They could make the home or they could make the church very attractive, just the people with their own talents. And then the bride, of course, was decked out in all of her glory and splendor. And sometimes it was a full wedding with all the ushers and bridesmaids. But at the homes, it was small. If it was at the church or the pastor's study, you understood you went by by invitation only, but if it was at the church, the whole neighborhood turned out. All the friends and neighbors went. And following it, there would be a sort of reception. There would be punch and of course the wedding cake, and everybody enjoyed it. And before the couple pulled out to go on their honeymoon, somebody during the wedding had put a whole lot of tin cans attached to the back end so it'd make a great noise when they pulled out. And someone would write "just married" on the side of the car, and they would try to erase it, but they didn't do it. The young couples didn't mind too very much to be noticed, but if it was an older couple, they would like to erase it, and they would stop on the way and get off as much of it because they didn't want to call attention to themselves. There was one custom where the first night they returned from the honeymoon that they gave them what was called a serenade. They went with the cowbells and different things that made a noise, and they would take a plank and put their foot on it and hold this up, and then they let go, and it would sound just like a pistol shot. So that went on until the couple would come out on the porch and maybe serve some treat or other, some cake or punch or something like that, and then they would go home. Then there was another custom which was not quite as good, that they would get the bridegroom and keep him for hours. About 12 or 15 young men would, they didn't exactly kidnap him, but they restrained him. And they could, and they would take him to one of the fellows' homes, and they would keep him for hours. And there have been occasions when they kept him all night. And they would, the bride would be all excited and wondered what had happened to him. And there would be somebody in the crowd who went back and forth to tell them the news. They'd say what was happening at the fountain. That one wasn't too popular. And then the boys who took part in these things that were so strenuous, when it came their time to get married, they were scared to death because they didn't know what would happen to them. And they usually would just slip off to Rossville or somewhere and have a private wedding.
That's real fine. In the parlor. One person told me, Blanche, and this fresh, now that might be stretching the truth a little bit, but the fact that they didn't have morticians and all this, and they didn't embalm, if you could talk a bit about just how the funeral was different and how the death people responded to the death, and he'll let us know when we're ready. Okay, we're ready.
When there was a death in the home, the body was taken away for a little while for preparation, then brought back to the home, always. And then the relatives were notified, and they came from distances, and the neighbors came, the friends came, and then the body would be brought back in the coffin, all ready for burial, before nighttime, and was placed in the parlor. And that's where the people would sit usually, but if there was a crowd, there would be chairs in the yard if it was summertime, and sometimes they would be just about all over the house, the people would. And they would stay till midnight, just a large crowd would, and then from midnight on there would be about 6 or 8 who stayed. At midnight there was a midnight supper served, and some friend of the family or a relative would prepare the food. In summer it could be sandwiches and coffee, because they always serve coffee, but there were other times when there was a meal set on the table and they all came in and ate, and it took quite a bit. You would have to buy a ham or something like that to be able to feed the crowd. Then those 6 or 8 who stayed with you steadfastly all night, the family retired, supposedly, some of them did, especially the mother, and then at breakfast, these that stayed on would stay for breakfast, and the relatives who had come from a distance would be there. Now they took them to the church for the funeral, and everybody came. And again, the flowers were from the yards. Mainly, there was no sprays brought from the city or anything like that, but they got to where they could make beautiful wreaths and sprays. And if the person was older, they thought that that person would appreciate getting flowers from the other's garden, and they would bring their very best of their flowers and make it as pretty as possible, and they would make it as easy on the family as possible. All of the family went to the funeral, of course, and then they began to scatter afterward. The neighbors sometimes stayed for the evening meal also, or maybe it was the noon meal if the funeral was in the morning, and they wanted to be sure that the family was not left alone or needed for anything, and they offered to do things to help you. I don't remember just how the body was embalmed, and it wasn't always done.
That's fine. That's excellent. Gee whiz, we're all finished. You know, your responses, you yourself, I've got 3 others to include to make up for the lacking time, but already here I've got about 8 minutes, and I only needed 11, so you've really